What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy getting some chin squatches. We're from Mtg, and we enjoy magic, in case you didn't know that. And also, in case you didn't know, Mythic Championship 5 is this weekend. As a matter of fact, it starts on the day that a lot of you are going to be watching this video. And well over a third of the field of that tournament is some version of Golos / Field of the Dead. Sometimes incorporating Fires of Invention, but not all the time. Mainly the big problem players are these two idiots right here. So it's understandable that even with an emergency ban coming on Monday that might do away with one or both of these guys, the patrons still want to see a way to beat Golos before the weekend is out. So today's motto is, when they go los, we go hard. Let's look at Jund Land Destruction. That's right, land destruction. It might actually be time for an old favorite / most hated deck in Magic to finally make its return, because we actually have some cards in Standard right now that are reasonably decent and also blow up lands, which we haven't really had access to in a good long time. That said, there are still some kind of bad cards that blow up lands that I nonetheless want to play in this deck. So we're going to play 3 copies of Rubble Reading. Now, at first, I was on just 2 copies of this card, but we're playing kind of a little ramp package so we can turn this card into Stone Rain whenever possible, and if we're just playing 2 copies of him, we're really not seeing it often enough. So I bumped it up to 3, but I still don't want to play 4 because this is far and away the worst card in the entire deck. But when you come across Field of the Dead decks, it's incredible. So if you're going to tune a deck to beat Field of the Dead, let's do this. But it can also pick off an opponent's like only source of a certain color and like against 3 color decks and such. So there's a lot this can do, and the Scry is pretty good. It's not worth a whole extra mana as compared to Stone Rain. Just give us Stone Rain back, wizards. But at the same time, it's still worth playing, considering that it's going to blow up Field of the Dead every time that we see it on site, and the Scries are going to help make sure that we either get another answer to a future Field of the Dead or a threat that can close the game out. But, as I said before, there are actual good cards in this standard that blow up lands, like Bedeck Bedazzle, which I'll play 3 copies of. Another thing I was on 2 copies of at first, but I bumped it up to 3 because I like it so much. This is actually pretty decent right now for a variety of reasons in this deck. It does 3 things here. Obviously, it does the 2 things pretty well. Blows up small creatures in the early game. I like having that early removal piece. That helps. But also blows up Field of the Dead and deals 2 damage to them, which is nice. But aside from that, we've also got a couple of creatures in this deck that can actually benefit from the pump spell version of this. You know, deal 7 damage with a questing beast out of nowhere some of the time if you use Bedeck to actually pump one of your guys. So, and that's been a relevant play a bunch, by the way. It sounds niche, but it's actually come up like 3 or 4 times. So just keep that play in mind too. Being able to pump one of your own guys is important. Like a dragon token flying through the air for 7 damage is also pretty key a lot of the time versus these field decks. So do keep that in mind too. But for the most part, this is both early game removal against the mono red decks or decks that play Risen Reef, for instance. You can even kill a Leafkin Druid if you absolutely needed to. But in the later game, or once we get our ramp down, it doesn't even have to be the late game, you know. We can just blow up that field for what seems to be a fairly reasonable price considering the extra damage that'll sometimes even kill a Planeswalker. But without a doubt, my favorite card in the deck that blows up lands, Casualties of War. This thing is just repulsive to actually resolve in a game of standard Magic, and it pays off our ramp package pretty well. You know, I was saying earlier we're trying to play a light ramp package so that we can turn Rubble Reading into a Stone Rain. Well, that same ramp package allows us to get this on turn 4 in some games where it's just disgusting to actually resolve this, you know. You're going to be taking out 3, 4 things some of the time if you get a perfect shot with this, but at the very least, it's very often a 3-for-1, especially in a format with so many important enchantments. You know, we're using this to kill Field of the Dead, don't get me wrong, yeah, but this is also a little bit of, help against those Fires of Invention decks, or Cavalcade of Calamity decks if we can resolve it, because it's going to kill one of their creatures, blow up one of their lands, and blow up their Cavalcade, and that is always a good way to get started turning the corner. But there's also odd decks in this format that play like Ethereal Absolution and weird enchantments, so this has an awful lot of crossplay and isn't only good against Field of the Dead. If we can resolve this, it's going to be good against pretty much any deck in the format. I think if you're going to try to make land destruction work, then you have to have some options because, yeah, it's good against Field of the Dead, but it's not going to be good against every other deck. So with that in mind, things like Casualties of War that can blow up multiple permanent types or Bedeck Bedazzle that can be used to kill small creatures is a really important way to go if you're trying to build Ponza at the moment. Now, another great example of that is Assassin's Trophy. This is the last card in the deck that can destroy lands, but it can also destroy everything else, just any permanent type imaginable. Something else that's important when we run up against these hard-to-kill enchantments like Fires and Cavalcade of Calamity, but this is also going to take out huge creatures against that Stompy deck, or just when they plop down Questing Beasts, you know, you're more than happy to let them have a land, so long as you're not getting hit by Questing Beasts turn after turn. So it's just a great card right now that also takes care of like early game Okos against the Simic mid-range decks and Teferis when you need to do that. It's just great against 3-mana Planeswalkers, but it's even going to kill Rotting Regisars and other like really key creatures and Planeswalkers and enchantments that come down in the early game right now without really costing you too much. So Assassin's Trophy is just an all-star, and I've seen some people cutting down from 4 to as low as 2 in some of their builds, and I can understand that in builds like Golgari Adventures, for instance, but in this deck, where the primary goal is to be able to blow up Field of the Dead, we absolutely need Assassin's Trophy, but we will more than take and be happy for all the extra value this card provides, because it's just going to be a catch-all clean answer to just about anything your opponent can play. But you know, another card that's typically quite good against Field of the Dead, and we have access to in this color combination, is Legion's End, so let's slot a couple of copies in that bad boy. But just like Assassin's Trophy and Bedeck Bedazzle, what I like about this is the amount of cross-play that it has on it. You know, not only is it good against Field of the Dead, and it is good against I foughted. You should say that whenever you play Field of the Dead. I foughted. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. This can blow up a whole, you know, side of the table full of zombie tokens and let you just attack in for the win, or just hit the reset button if that's what you're trying to do. And that's nice, but it's also good against pretty much every creature aside from Bone Crusher Giant and the occasional Chandra Spitfire. In the Cavalcade of Calamity deck, and that's pretty nice, and against the Simic mid-range decks and the Golos decks for that matter, you can take out Hydroid Krasis along with any other Hydroid Krasises in their hand they may have chained into by casting the first Krasis. So you can take out Gilded Goose before it creates any value and possibly get any other geese out of their hand if you went first, you know, and I think that's awesome too. There's just a lot of really good play lines with Legion's End right now on turn 2 and well beyond that, so at least a couple of copies. But speaking of removal, we're running 3 copies of Murderous Rider in the deck as well. Now, it looks like, just offhand, it's going to be kind of tough to cast this thing, but we've got more than enough black sources in the mana base to do it, plus Fabled Passage, plus some ramp that can help us get black. All totaled, I think we have like 18 or 19 black sources, so don't worry about actually casting either half of this. But this too, another card with a ridiculous amount of crossplay. It might not be able to kill a Field of the Dead, but it can kill pretty much any other permanent in that entire deck, because a lot of them will play Planeswalkers, a lot of them will obviously play Golos, so this can kill that before it's able to cast any free spells or anything. So Murderous Rider is good for that, but it's also a kind of a concession in some ways against these Simic mid-range decks that'll play Oko, or the Bant mid-range decks that also play Teferi, decks that play Hydroid Krasis. It's just always nice to have a 3-mana kill that thing no matter what it is. You know, well, not no matter what it is, but kill that permanent that's gonna kill me almost no matter what it is always really important. And against these Cavalcade of Calamity decks and other aggro decks, it's nice to have a 2/3 lifelinker on the other half of this card. So this just does so much work against everything that even though it's not specifically good against Golos decks, I still think it's a card we have to play, because there's really not that many 3-drops that I want to main deck here, and this is one of the best. But while we're talking about creatures, I might as well let you know we're also playing 3 Questing Beasts in the deck because it's just unstoppable. I mean, this is one of the other most played cards at Mythic Championship 5. Frank Karsten broke it all down, all the numbers of all the different important cards that are being played, and this is in the top 5 of cards being slotted into decks at Mythic Championship 5. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing that plays really well against Oko decks, keep that in mind, but it plays really well against just about everything because the stats are incredible. Haste and Death Death Touch and Vigilance. Just a ridiculous pile of abilities to put together. Plays well against like Geese and Mana Dorks and tokens and stuff like that because it's going to swing right through them. There's all kinds of really sweet things that this does right now, and it's just one of the most aggressive creatures that we could play. Considering that we're on a ramp package, there are going to be some games where we just throw this down on turn 3 and ride it to victory because that's a thing you can do in Standard right now. So if our land destruction or Ponza plan isn't working for us in a given game or a given matchup, then we've always got Questing Beast to kind of fall back on, and it's great to blow up a land or two of your opponents and put them on the back foot, unable to cast big stuff, and then just kind of finish the game with a Questing Beast. There's a time-honored tradition of ramp decks playing reasonably big creatures at aggressively costed stats and all that to kind of close games out, and Questing Beast is probably the best way of doing that in Standard at the moment. But as for the rest of the creatures, there's that ramp package I've been gabbing on about. Just 3 Arboreal Grazer and 4 copies of Paradise Druid here. There's really not much to say other than these are good ramp cards. That's pretty much it. We've got like 3 6-drops and a bunch of 5-drops in this deck, so it's probably prudent that we play some ramp. Let's do that so we can actually play our Magic cards before we die. But anyway, let's move on to the Planeswalkers. We've got 7 of them in the deck because Planeswalkers in general are decent against Field of the Dead because they really don't have a whole lot of Planeswalker removal in general, but they can take out creatures with sweepers and such, like Deafening Clarion on occasion, but you'll very rarely see real Planeswalker removal in these Golos / Field of the Dead decks, so they're fairly weak to them, especially walkers like Sarkhan. And with 7 walkers in the deck, Sarkhan gets that much better. It turns out that Field of the Dead is not only weak to Planeswalkers in a way, but they're much more weak to big fat flying creatures, because you can get 10 zombies out. Kind of doesn't matter if I can swing for 8 in the air. Aside from doing that, it also just makes creatures, make giant dragons if you want to do that. And that 4/4 dragon, just like Questing Beast, can be bedecked and hit for 7 in the air all at one time and just close the game out of nowhere. So, the ability to either make dragons or become one himself, along with all your other Planeswalkers, is just so insanely good against not only Field of the Dead, but it turns out a fair amount of the decks in Standard right now that Sarkhan is a great finisher. But that's not all for 5-mana Planeswalkers, because I'm also going to play 2 copies of Nissa Who Shakes the World in the deck. And honestly, I think that this is probably one of the more cuttable cards in the deck. We got some 6-drops in here that we want to play. The ramp helps for that. But honestly, the deck is nowhere near as hungry as the average Nissa deck. It's not like we're playing Hydroid Krasis, Voracious Hydra, or anything like that we absolutely need all of this ramp for. I am mostly playing Nissa as kind of a tool to out mid-range other decks. We come across some aggro decks. This will out mid-range them. And Nissa is traditionally quite good at fighting against Field of the Dead decks, at least for the couple of turns that they're getting their zombie production started up. Because usually it takes field decks a turn, 2, 3, something like that to actually start making 8 zombies a turn, which they will get to at some point, but the first couple of turns are reasonably dry, and you can fight those turns really well with some lands. Plus, it's fairly safe to make your lands into creatures against Field of the Dead decks, especially the ones that don't play a whole lot of sweepers. So you can even out mid-range them some of the time, but against the more mid-rangey Simic decks, this is a nice tool to have match them. And against the Cavalcade of Calamity decks, if you can get this down as early as turn 3 in this deck, this is a great way to fight them too. And sort of, again, just go over the top of them, out mid-range them in the mid-game. So I really like Nissa as an option, and I want to play Planeswalkers, period, in this deck so we can maximize the value we get out of Sarkhan. But at the same time, I'm not sure that this is exactly what this deck needs. But it has won a game or 2 along the way, just as Nissa is wont to do. She's very good at doing that. But let's move into the Golgari color combination for our last couple of walkers in the deck, because we're playing 1 copy of Vraska, the Queen, yes Queen, and all that memes, blah blah. This is a great card against Oko and Teferi right now specifically, which is why I'm carrying 1 copy in the main deck. This wasn't the board at the beginning of things here, but it turns out that this is just fantastic against a lot of decks right now. Vraska is particularly good at the moment, but I don't want to play too many copies. Same thing with Garruk. I'm just going to play 1 copy of this, but this is another really good finisher outside of just like a card like Sarkhan. Just the ability to make 2 wolves a turn has proved to be insane in pretty much any deck that I've seen Garruk played in or that I've played Garruk in myself. 2 wolves a turn is very nasty and can sometimes even keep up up with Field of the Dead's kind of production, especially if we've been able to blow up a Field of the Dead or two at that point. But against pretty much everything else, so long as we can actually get to the point where we can resolve a Garruk, this is insane against the aggro decks, very good against the mid-range matchups like Simic mid-range, so keep that in mind. The ability to blow up a creature and draw a card is also very dumb, so just everything it does is nutso, and fairly easy to get to its ultimate. But for the most part, the easiest way to finish a game with it is just make wolves every turn and dare your opponent to do something about it. It's just an unbelievable closer, and we need a few of those. Now here's our mana base right here, 26 lands in all, 14 green sources, 13 black sources to help us hit that Murderous Rider and a couple of other important cards, and 12 red sources, which is a little low but helped along by the presence of Fabled Passage and Paradise Druid. So we really don't have too much trouble casting our cards. Once we get into the mid game in this deck, we'll likely have the mana to do so. But it's the early game I was most worried about. That's why you see 12 untapped green sources on turn 1 to help us get Arboreal Grazer and help us get that Paradise Druid by turn 2 as well. By the way, one quick point, I'm not too sure about the Bloodfell Caves and the Rugged Highlands in this deck. These could just as easily be Fabled Passages if you wanted to play all 4. Just throwing that out there. Now here's our sideboard, and I will skip directly to the weird-looking card. Here's Revenge of Ravens. This is actually a really good tool against Field of the Dead decks because they effectively have to make twice as many zombies to kill you. The problem is if they attack with all those zombies, they're going to kill themselves before they ever actually hit you for combat damage. So this is actually really good against Field, but it also neutralizes Cavalcade of Calamity and punishes them for attacking you by hitting them for damage. This is very good against 2 very insanely popular decks in the format right now. So do not discount how good Revenge of Ravens is, especially in a deck they can get it out on turn 3 against Calamity decks. That's an important line. Aside from that, everything else is pretty cut and dried here. You know, we've got Flame Sweep, which is also good against a field full of zombies, but intensely good against the Cavalcade of Calamity decks. It kills pretty much everything in those decks aside from their biggest creatures. So yes to Flame Sweep, and it'll even do work against other decks some of the time too. But yet another card that has cross-play against Field of the Dead and aggro. Flame Sweep is very important, but it's not in the main deck because I didn't want to kill my Paradise Druids with it. Noxious Grass was in there to kill Okos, Teferis, and a whole bunch of other creatures and Planeswalkers in the format right now. Duress is there to get any important cards out of their hand before they can even cast them, which is an easy and great way of dealing with all kinds of decks right now, from Fires of Invention to Field decks even though you can't get Field, you can get a host of other important cards in that deck. But there's a ton of decks right now against which Duress is good. Even Mono Red, you can get the Cavalcade out of their hand, so Duress is almost main deckable, I think. Bedevil is in there as just an answer to important artifacts, yes, but also important Planeswalkers and creatures. This could be another Murderous Rider, but I didn't necessarily want a card that loses its life. You know, it's just, there was something weird about it, and I kind of like the idea of another sideboard option against artifacts. So I went with Bedevil here instead of Murderous Rider, but you can do whichever one you wanted to. There's also a Massacre Girl. It's so hard for me to say her name. There's also a Massacre Girl in the sideboard as yet another sweeper option, this time one that leaves a body on the battlefield. It's not quite as good against Calamity as you might think because sometimes it'll just die. You'll die before it'll even hit the table. That said, if we can ramp it out with the Paradise Druid, it's guaranteed to kill all the X1s and X2s on the battlefield. So that's really good against Calamity if you can get to it. But this is mostly just good against Mono Black and a bunch of other decks that play creatures right now. So just Massacre Girl, counted as another sweeper that leaves a fat body on the battlefield. We'll play at least one. The only other card on the board is Thrashing Brontodon. Saved it for last because it too looks a little bit weird. But mostly I've been using this to blow up enchantments. I think it's really important to have an option in the sideboard right now that does that. Now here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 67, which is pretty high for a deck that's specifically tuned to beat one deck. But here is the good thing about this deck, in case you didn't catch it in the subtext of the deck tech. It's actually pretty decent against a large majority of the field. In game 1, we have some trouble against Cavalcade of Calamity decks. These really fast aggro decks, and Mono Black for that matter, we sometimes have some issues against, but for the most part, we can out mid-range other decks. If we're actually able to get to our 5 and 6 drops, we can beat those aggro decks in game 1, and especially in games 2 and 3. And when it comes to Field of the Dead, we've got it all but sewn up. And that's because cards like Nissa and Sarkhan and Garruk and Questing Beast and Assassin's Trophy and Murderous Rider are just good Magic cards. They're just fantastic Magic cards that are good almost no matter what you're going up against. So that said, the deck has pretty solid game against almost anything that's across the table from you. So all that said, I hope you enjoyed this deck guide, and I hope you get a chance to play with the list. You know, if you really want to, click the first link in the description, go over to my friends at Mtg Player, check out any pieces that you might need, or just view the deck list in a concise place rather than having to watch the video all over again. I mean, I'd be happy if you did that. That'd be cool, but it's just a lot more succinct to click on the deck list and view it all on TCG Player. So do that if you want to. And note that the deck will not be completely obsoleted on Monday morning if they do ban something in Field of the Dead or in these Golos decks. Because like I've said a million times already, this has a fair amount of play against a lot of different decks in the field because it just plays a bunch of good cards. You know, just replace Rubble Reading with something else and you've got yourself a fairly ridiculous Jund mid-range deck. So even if they do ban something from Field or Golos, don't let it put you off this deck. I will be playing it on camera sometime very soon, like I've said, so if you want to wait until then to make your judgment, I fully understand, but if you want to see the deck in action, you'll be able to do that real soon. Aside from that, though, just, you know, do the YouTube stuff. Help me out, like, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. All that stuff helps more than you can possibly imagine, but if you really want to help support the channel with more than just clicks, then go over to the Patreon, link in the description, or just go to patreon.com/SBMTG. Throw $1 in the pot, and you'll help pick what decks we do around here. If you didn't like the idea of Jund land destruction, I put 4 other decks on the docket that you might have really liked. So throw $1 in the pot, help pick what we choose next. And yeah, pretty sure that's it for this one. I will see you very soon with some Mythic Championship coverage and some gameplay of this thing. So, in the meantime, I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Psych, because here I am immediately right after I said goodbye to you. I just got to tie up a couple of loose ends here at the end of the video. First of all, Patreon shout out for this deck guide goes out to Justin Vess. You're a new patron, so thanks for the support. Appreciate you, homie. But you also want to see my take on Mill in this format. So just for you and everybody else that loves Mill, myself included, I'm going to put that on the next poll. So if you want to vote for it, head on over to the Patreon. Poll will be up tomorrow. But I've also got to do some talking about Mythic Championship 5. So I think as early as tomorrow, when the tournament starts on Friday, I'm going to do a video where I'm just doing sort of basic metagame coverage of all the things. I'm going to try to talk about as many decks as I possibly can, especially that sweet red-black sacrifice deck. There's one cat food deck in the whole field. It's actually there. I'm going to be rooting for it. There's also a Jund list that's it's not like this one really. It plays like Riding Regisaur or Gruul Spellbreaker. It's just trying to like get huge dudes on the battlefield as quickly as possible. And it has some tools in it against Field of the Dead, like Assassin's Trophy, Legions, and all that. So a little different than this one, but there are some decks that I'm really rooting for and that are super cool. I'm going to try to go over as many decks as I can in that video. So watch out for that. And yeah, double extra thank you to all the patrons that have probably already scrolled past by now. But, you know, I guess that means that I'm just talking to dead space and there's no name scrolling by. So watch these videos. That could be something that you do with your time, just watching them videos. But anyway, I'll see you soon. Bye.